Well, greetings, visitors to the paper prison. I want to thank you again for taking time out in your day to come visit me on visiting day here. And I also want to thank everyone who hung out with me during my little series of looking at a lot of the copies of pencils that I had collected during my time as an inker in New York. And I want to thank you all for just listening and your comments. They were great. But the funny thing is that as I did that series, it almost started to become like the faux New York diary that I never did. One of our roommates, he actually started making a diary of his time in New York on his computer, which at the time was like, uh, a computer diary. Wow, a computer journal. I wish I'd just done anything. So I think I'm going to expand on that and talk about those heady times. Um, and I thank you for coming along with me on the reminisce, and let me at least have this record of those times as we talk about the Prisoner's New York Journal. And before we get started, I just want to point out this is the maiden voyage of the new lapel or lavalier microphone. I've done a lot of tests with it. I think it's pretty cool. However, the acoustics in this room still aren't the great, so it might negate some of the benefits I'm going to get from the microphone. But you know, a 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step. So here we are. So let's continue. So Bob Down had an interesting pedigree in that he was in the first, or one of the first, John Buscema comic art workshop classes. Now, when I was a kid, as I've said, I wanted desperately to go to this thing. But I was 13, living in North Carolina, and this thing was in New York City, and I knew my family was not going to spend almost $1,000 in 1976 to send me to New York to learn how to draw funny books. But he did. And he actually is 10 years older than me, so he was 23. But it just sounded like an incredible experience for him. And he could tell the stories of those times in such a way that just made you think you were right there. And it was just great. So, anyway, I'm working for Bob, and he says, and this is in early 93, and he says, I'm going to move to New York. Do you want to come along as my roommate and live-in assistant? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Now, one of the things I was so incentivized to do this is that this was still fresh off the blast of the death of Superman igniting of the comics industry. I mean, things were hopping. I mean, comics companies were popping up everywhere. Comic shops were popping up everywhere. And it just seemed like we've become movies. We've arrived. This is what you can really make a career out of. So we went, and got to tell you, that first year, there was nonstop work. I wasn't making a lot of money in the beginning as an assistant, but I just took everything that was offered to me, and yes, I worked morning to night, every waking hour, but I never had to drive a cab, and I never had to work at McDonald's. All I did was ink. And it was just like that for a while. So I started off working for Bob, and then the word got out to Art Nichols that I was around, and Art was using a lot of assistants. So I went over to his place, which I walked across to the Greenwich Village side, or the West Village, and to his apartment, and he started giving me work. So between Bob and Art Nichols, I just had more than I could just deal with. That said, I was also introduced to artist Chris Wozniak. Wozniak, very talented artist, who still manages to get his name in the news these days. And I only worked for him once, but the checks didn't bounce, so I'm very happy about that. And I also was offered work by Joe Rubenstein, but by that point, I just couldn't take another thing. I wanted desperately, because who isn't a fan of Joe Rubenstein, especially around that time? And but here's the thing: between Art Nichols, Bob Downs, Chris Wozniak, and Joe Rubenstein, they all sat down with me and gave me art lessons, and basically pounded me into shape like a base metal into the artist I would become. I will always be beholden to them. They were great. You know, human beings are flawed people to begin with. Comic artists, even more so. But these guys were so generous with their time and also, in a couple of cases, with their money, paying me. I have nothing but great experiences. Now, talked about comics companies popping up everywhere. Around that time, Jim Shooter launched Defiant Comics. And let me tell you, there was so much potential there. I remember those first books come out. They were new, they were innovative, they were groundbreaking. But we were also starting to see cracks in the industry, right? Because Shooter's first offerings, and I'm going to mention that something about that also. But Shooter's first offerings to Diamond, they told him, "Oh, this would be like 2 million in sales, right?" And then came back, it was 500,000. And I know today to have a book sell 500,000 is you would just kill for that. But the thing is, Jim was cool. I mean, Diamond came back and they apologized profusely. Said, "Look, we're sorry. Our projections were off, I guess, and we really thought it was going to be 2 million. We're sorry we built it up like that." And Jim was like, "It's cool, 500,000. That's a pretty good number," and just continued to go on. Now, you weren't seeing the cracks quite yet, but you could feel it underneath, and the underneath was the total instability of the arts and the people in the arts coming to the fore. And it is my opinion that Steve Ditko screwed Jim Shooter royally. Basically, he signed on to do something, and he did it, and then he signed on to do the next thing, and Defiant solicited for it, and then Ditko had some kind of philosophical problem with the project, and then just bailed on him, so that Defiant had to resolicit. And losing the creator of Spider-Man and putting someone else on there really hurt him. I found that to be very unprofessional and self-indulgent and not adult at all. And I'm sorry. Yeah, Ditko has given us a lot of wonderful things, but that was uncool in my opinion. So that was the beginning of the problems for Shooter at Defiant. And then Marvel realized, we got two real big problems. One is image, and the other is whatever the hell Shooter does next. And whatever the hell was next was Defiant. So they put on this flimsy lawsuit that just locked up a lot of deals that would have kept Defiant floated. And little did I know, this was the portents of the world we live in now, where people sabotage each other with, fraudulent lawsuits. I'm really not very happy with humanity right now. And that was the beginning of it that I saw. So, but here's the thing, I idolized Jim Shooter, and being able to work at one of his companies, even as a staff person, who later went on to ink a majority of some books there, it was the greatest thing in my life. And I remember one time I just had to get out of the apartment. So it was Saturday. I went into Defiant. I brought the books the pages I was inking in there. No one was there except for Shooter. He was in his office. And he came out and he talked to me. And I just thought he was so giving. I think he really liked the fans. And he really liked people who did comics. And I think he really loved comic artists. And say what you will about him, that was my takeaway for him. So, okay, so time drags on. We're getting into the second year I am in New York. And the bubble's starting to burst. People are realizing you're not going to send your kid to college with a box of X-Men #1 by Jim Lee. Glad he made $1 million off it, but still, it's not going to happen. So Comic shops are starting to shutter. Comic companies going out of business. Um, and this isn't even at that time, but it just makes me think of the experiment of cross gen and how Defiant could have been saved. Again, hindsight's 2020, but Shooter rented a very expensive office in New York because he thought, a real company should have an office, should have a center, headquarters. But looking back, what if he just worked out of his apartment? All the other artists worked out of their home studios. So he saved all that money. And that's what kind of reminds me of CrossGen, which let's talk about in another video because this is not the correct time frame. So, okay, things are just shuddering. And while it hasn't happened yet, I think the web is starting to encroach a little bit, just the littlest bit, on people's reading habits. Print is not dead yet, but there's a contraction, there's a correction. And ultimately, Diamond would shut down. I had some great times at Diamond. I got to ink backgrounds on David Lapham pages. I got to, because some nights there was a jam session where we were just there all night. Jim would order, Jim would order Chinese for everyone, and we would just ink all night to get things on schedule, bro. And there was some great people there. Unfortunately, some of them just aren't with us anymore. There was artist Greg Boone, who I think was more of a. I didn't see him do too much interior. I think he was doing a lot of design work for Jim. And I'm betting a lot of these people came out of the Kubert School, but I'm not sure. No one, you're not going to really know his name, but he was really good. And he died. He left us, God, maybe over a decade ago. Louis Small recently left us. Lewis apparently came on to ink, or rather draw the series Dark Dominion that Ditko bailed on, and I got to ink a page of that. And then either Shooter and Small didn't get along, or Shooter fired him, or he quit, but he left. And then Joe James got the book. And but then Louis Small went on to do some incredible Vampirilla covers. I think really it was a case of finding where best to put his strengths, and it was on that Vampirillas. And I always thought he was a nice guy, and I'd see him at conventions, and there's no reason for him to remember me, but he did. And he uh, and he passed on, and we are the lesser for it in the artistic community. And of course, Art Nichols. Art Nichols, who taught me so much and paid me so much. He died, a few years back, not quite 10 years ago. So farewell, Art. Then, and of course, the real big hit was Jim Shooter. Wow. Jim had a lot to do with me wanting to be in comics. Sure, I'd already made the decision after I kind of discovered him, but he really kept that momentum going. And I'm really glad I got to meet him. And I'm glad I got to, quote unquote, well, I actually did work with him, work for him and work with him when I did my own self publishing. He was very nice. He helped me out on a self publishing project, and that speaks volumes. I mean, I'm a big nobody, and he helped me. And finally, the person who actually inspired me to be work in comics and be an artist, a comic book artist, yes, but that led to wanting to be an artist, was Dave Cockrum. And Dave Cockrum, there at the end of Defiant, they had a graphic novel, and Jim Shooter hired him. Excuse me. Jim Shooter hired him to illustrate the graphic novel, pencil and ink. And he was in there doing corrections in Defiant, doing corrections. And I walked through, and I got to say hello and tell him how much he inspired me and the reason that I wanted to be in comics. And he reached out and grabbed my hand and shook it. And really, what more can you ask of your heroes? He was genuinely nice. I've met a lot of people that aren't genuinely nice or nice at all. The funny thing is that Bob was with me, Bob Downs. Bob does not like using whiteout. And Dave Cockrum was whiting out half of a page and was going to re-ink, redraw and re-ink on top of the whiteout. And I could just see in Bob's mind him going, no, 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 no. It was so funny. It was like just, you know, just a artistic disagreement that I could just see happening in real time. And Dave Cockrum left us quite some time back. It's got to be over 15 years ago now. And because of my time in New York and because of my time at Defiant, I got to meet so many of my heroes. Hey, quick edit here. I don't want to bring everyone down with a list of all the people who have left us from Defiant. So I want to remind you that we still have so many people left from those times. We have great people like J.J. Jackson and Joe James and Paula and Alan Weiss and um, David Hillman and Debbie Fix. All great people, and I'm really glad they're still around with us. Finally, the actual New York experience itself was absolutely the best you could hope for and ask for. Um, at this time, the Lower East Side, see, everyone knows about Greenwich Village. That's supposed to be where the artists hang out. The problem is that Greenwich Village, there were so many successful artists, it became very like a high rent area. So all the starving artists had to move out and go across the way to the east side, or they called it the East Village, or the Lower East Side. That's where the starving artists live, where it used to be Greenwich Village. So the Lower East Side at that time was being gentrified, cleaned up, but nobody knew it yet. So it was a great place to live, but the rents were still in the crappy rents. And so the other funny thing is that there was a show called NYPD Blue at the time being shot, and they would shoot exteriors there. And one day we walked by and we saw Dennis Franz and God, what is that guy? From Hill Street Blues, and Bob looks and goes, "Hey, look, it's the redheaded guy from Hill Street Blues. Hey, look, it's the fat guy from Hill Street Blues." And then we were close to Thompson Square Park, and they shot like some night scenes there, and we got to watch everyone get act and shoot in real time. Great. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was being shot in New York at the time, the first movie. Um, Here's the thing: all good things must end. So that was our Dave's New York Journal from '93 and '94. I didn't know it, but it was like the end of the golden age of comics creation, and you never know it when you're there. You know how they say these are the good old days. You never know it, and actually that kind of hamstrung me because for so long I just kept working as if the old mechanisms were in place, the old rules were in place. I did not, you know, I didn't like try to go along with the web or new materials or new ways of distributing. And that's my problem. But I think I've finally modernized myself. And maybe we'll talk about my modern projects later. Also, I don't want to make this about me, but I've had some pretty good projects in the past, so I might show some of my own work. But I'm still very much in love with the artists and the works of my youth. We're definitely going to be talking about Neil Adams. We're definitely going to be talking about John Byrne and maybe a little bit about me. But I'll decide which one we do next. Well, look, guys, I want to tell you, I'm having a bang and a ball doing this little show. If even one person watches it, I'm there for you. So please, um, as they say in YouTube land, please like, share, and subscribe. And I got a lot going on, but I'm gonna get the next one of these up just as quickly as I can. But it takes a minute to collect my thoughts, and I wanna be able to represent these works of arts as they are deserved. All right, well, everyone, I want to thank you. And did I say please like, share, and subscribe? I hope I did. Anyway, you all have a good rest of your January, the beginning of your new year. And if there's anything you guys want me to talk about, please feel free to mention it in the comments. All right, now everyone have a good day. Take care and bye bye.